Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, a very warm welcome also from my side on this chilly November day in Zurich. My name is Martin Meyer. I'm with NZZ and the Swiss Institute of International Studies, SIAF. I'm pleased to moderate this afternoon the following discussion between our fascinating speakers, Baroness Falkner of Margraven and Professor Yanis Varoufakis. Give them a strong hand, please. It's almost a sign of populism, but we'll check that later. I'm sure we'll have a quite lively discussion, and afterwards you also have the time to ask some spicy questions. Please use the opportunity. But let me give you first a short introduction. It is a common fact that populism has spread in the last 10 years over many parts of the world and also over Europe. Crowds of angry people protest against their governments, against administration, against elected politicians, against big companies, against migrants and migration, not to forget the threats of climate change. They are often supported and sometimes also manipulated by mighty leaders who often have their hidden agenda. The phenomenon is undeniable. However, we cannot treat it in a simplistic way. The populist politics of Turkey and its president do not correspond with the Gilets Jaunes movement. Brexiters show a different face compared with Italy's Lega party, etc., etc. When France's former president, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, was asked 3 years ago in Zurich what he thought of the current waves of populism and were they not a most dangerous phenomenon, he answered to almost everybody's surprise, on the contrary, the expression of the people is more than legitimate, it is the people who speaks. Of course, a slightly strange comment regarding the centralist state's strong hand over its citizens, but somehow in line with French republican and revolutionary traditions. To make the story short, many forms of populism need an individual examination. We need to know and discuss the background, the ways of expression, the figures who foster and steer them, of course, the goals and their means. Is Greta Thunberg a populist leader? Yes, in as far as she calls young people for action, directly addressing them, claiming that the institutions are not capable to fix the problems. Is Donald Trump a populist leader? Definitely, at least in the role of the actor who steers up the masses and therefore the rather ruthless entrepreneur of his own interests is also a cynic. But both Thunberg and Trump, how frivolous the comparison might sound, have one thing in common. They prefer the simple, if not simplistic, way to explain things. And this leads us to a definition of populism which can fit to more or less most of its individual expressions. Populism is mostly reductionist. It tries to deliver easy explanations for complex phenomena. It focuses on few reasons why this or that happens, or this or that should happen. And of course, populism often plays with scapegoats. Therefore, the more complex the world becomes under the influence of globalization, digitalization, migration, climate change, and many other factors, the more we are looking for survivable solutions. I say intentionally we, because everybody tends to have comfortable understanding of what happens in the world and his own environment. Complicated explanations are rarely welcome. They also do not converge with the needs of politicians who want to get the attention and the votes of their people. Politics is still and always will be also a game of passions. It is cliché speech which anticipates hate speech, a populistic simplification and caricature of the facts and worse of single persons or races. We all know this game. The Jews are guilty, the Greeks are lazy, the Germans are still Nazis, the Britons are arrogant bastards, the Swiss are hiders and cheaters. Could you ever trust an Austrian? Etc., etc. What can we do against it? The answer is even more difficult, as there are so-called populist paroles on positions which nevertheless might have some truth in them. Not everything the Gilets jaunes protested against was unjustified. Or if a majority of the British voted for Brexit, okay, probably wrong, but democratic and not just the result of some right-wing populism. So we have to be careful not to underestimate the will and the understanding of the voter. Plato's vision of a kingdom ruled by philosophers might be tempting for philosophers and other intellectuals, but in reality it would be a nightmare. The division into right or left does not help too much if we want to analyze it. Both sides have proven that they are capable of very healthy forms of populistic policies. What should worry us more is the fact that the gap between the elites and ordinary people are growing almost everywhere. Or to make it a little bit more polemic, it is easy to complain about the primitivism of global populists and their trends if you're a wealthy Democrat living on New York's Fifth Avenue. There are some modest inputs. I look forward to a lively and interesting discussion without too much diplomacy, hopefully, but of course with good arguments and also a sense of humor. Thank you. So my first question is supposed to be an easy one or also very difficult. What's your notion, understanding of populism? What is it actually?
Me?
Go ahead.
Right. Well, I think you defined it at length and quite well. I would say that I tend towards Giscard d'Estaing's view, but I'd go even a little further than that. If your audience want to look up a YouTube clip of President Obama when he was just leaving the White House, he was asked this question about populists, and his response was, in a democracy, isn't it a great thing to be popularly elected? In other words, majority, that's majoritarian systems, that's what we get. I think if you put it this way, I note the theme of this is populism fostering progress, stagnation, or regress. If you put it this way, if you take the UK situation, then if you're 52% of people who voted Leave, and Boris Johnson, the so-called populist PM, delivers Brexit, his catchphrase is completely ungrammatical, let's get Brexit. He doesn't say let's get Brexit done, he says get Brexit done. But if he gets Brexit done, it'll be fostering progress for those 52% of the people. It might result in economic stagnation, so we can throw that in. And as far as the Remainers are concerned, the 48%, it will be a regression. So I think looking down your list of the outcomes, it could be all of them, but nevertheless, he will have delivered in a liberal democratic system on the democratic verdict of the people.
But why is it so now, this phenomenon growing and everybody or many people are worried about it? No?
So I think, that's, I'm glad you reminded me of that part of the question. First of all, it's not new. It's not a new phenomenon. I think it started in the late 19th century in the US. But it's been there. I think we feel slightly, the kind of people they are in this room, the liberal elite, feel slightly discombobulated by it because it is not a way of doing things that we understand. So we've had all the stuff about fake news and truth and all of that. I would say that there are degrees, and the way social media and the pace of change and 24-hour news cycle does stuff makes my political class seek quick one-sentence answers to complex questions. I should confess that the first attempt to go to ask the people in a referendum about something complicated after the original EU referendum was my party, the Liberals, when I was Director of Policy, leading up to the '94 European elections, where we were facing the advent of the euro down the road. And I had a stand-up row with my party leader at the time, Paddy Ashdown, some people might remember who he was, because we wanted to offer a referendum on the euro. And I was horrified at the idea that you would be able to explain the complexity of the euro in a referendum. And there we find ourselves in 2016, belonging to the EU is complex.
Well, the Swiss do that all the time, and we get along with it, but it's a different situation, I have to agree.
Yeah. So the only thing I would say is that I feel slightly uncomfortable at the sort of liberal elite sneering at populism. Because if you summarize it, there is a kind of sense that the voters, the poor voters, are misled. They're so dumb they fell for fake news. They can't work out complexity for themselves. And, you know, if only it weren't for them. Whereas I would remind people that it was Mr. Churchill, when he lost the election, thumpingly, after having won the war, said, "The voters, the bastards." And I think that sums up what any losing politician feels the morning after. But they're not wrong. Your message wasn't attractive enough. And that's got to be the reality of the thing.
I'm not sure that Attlee was really better, but we don't go so far back into history anyway. Yanis, now your position is somehow planned to contradict a little bit.
To take it a bit further,
Please.
Not to contradict.
Okay,
I think it's a grave mistake to confuse popular with populist.
right.
Every politician, each one of us wants to be popular, unless you are of a very weird disposition. It is also a huge strategic, philosophical and ethical mistake to put in the same basket activists like Greta, who are calling upon youngsters, citizens, to participate in politics, to demonstrate when the political institutions that ought to be promoting their interests, the interests of humanity, are failing, to conflate them with a populist like Trump or Matteo Salvini. This is also a strategic and ethical error. And it's also a logical error, because if you put all these people in one basket, then populist doesn't mean anything. You know, you lose the semiotic power of the word. For me, populist is somebody who cynically promises all sorts of things to all sorts of different people, trying to harvest their anger and weaponize it in a toxic narrative that makes them a strong leader, a strong man, who rises up, whether this is Salvini or Mussolini, same thing in this context. And then, when in power, turns against the interests of those who pushed him into power. Think Donald Trump. You know, I will drain the swamp, and then he takes the good people from Goldman Sachs, your colleagues from across the pond, and puts them into the treasury, right? Now, that for me is a populist. A populist is somebody who offers everything as part of a campaign to intensify division, to utilize the anger. I mean, people talk about, you know, Putin and Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, all loathsome institutions and individuals, but they try to explain the rise of Donald Trump on the basis of that. It's rubbish. There's one statistic which, for me, explains why Donald Trump succeeded. I mean, there are many statistics, but one particularly stuck out in my mindset. When I discovered that for the first time since 1950, it was in 2015, that more than half of American families could not afford the cheapest car on the auto market in the United States. And when I say they can't afford, it was $14,000 Nissan, the cheapest car that was available on the market. And when I say they couldn't afford, I don't just mean they didn't have the money. I mean, they didn't have either the money or the credit worthiness to secure a $14,000 loan in order to buy one. And if you look at the fact that a very significant proportion of those who voted for Obama in 2008 voted for Trump in 2016, to do a Hillary Clinton, and to talk about them as the deplorables, and to justify this on the basis of vilifying the masses for the fact that the establishment, the liberal establishment, failed to deliver after 2008 a resolution of the great financial crisis. And let me just finish on this topic by proving that I am an unreconstructed economist. My understanding of the last 100 years of history is that populism, the way I defined it, based on xenophobia, based on harvesting anger and turning that energy against the many, the majority. Populism is bred by a deflationary capitalist economy.
Okay.
I think that most of my German friends make a huge mistake to attribute Hitler to hyperinflation. If you plot against time scale the percentage that the Nazi Party was getting in regional and local and national elections during the 1920s, you'll find that there is no correlation between hyperinflation and the percentage of the Nazi Party. The moment Herr Brüning imposed massive austerity and you had a descent into deflation and an increase of unemployment, the Nazis shot up. This is what we found out in Greece in 2010. The moment we went to deflation, the Nazis of Golden Dawn rose up. A deflationary economy, and by this I don't mean necessarily that you have a negative rate of inflation, but deflationary forces as a result of excess savings vis-à-vis investment, is the best foundation for some tin pot potential dictator getting up on a soapbox and saying, it is the other, it is the Jew, it is the Syrian, it is the German, it is the Greek who is at fault. I will make you proud again.
Okay, that's what I said in my introduction.
Is it?
It's a strong, yeah, it more or less you copied it. No, what I wanted to say is...
I only copy from the best.
In Switzerland, you definitely got the right place. Thank you. No, what I wanted to say, yeah, might be right. But there were just small excursion back to history. There were other reasons also for Hitler's rise. Dissatisfaction with Versailles. They were hurt by the losing the war and all these kind of things. Yeah, total
humiliation plus deflation.
And this is a humiliation. Is very important.
But the Greeks felt that, and the Americans felt that after 2008, after so many years of stagnant medium incomes.
Would you compare it with the same feelings?
Yes, the feeling of humiliation. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to make a quantitative comparison.
Humiliated as a nation.
As a nation.
Okay.
So as a community. Okay. If you go to the places where, to the Rust Belt communities in the United States, the humiliation is intense. Do you know what it is for somebody who was a blue-collar worker, a patriot, a Republican, to have to apply for disability benefits? The same person that was, portraying people as benefit queens for living off the state, but having lost their job at the age of 45, 50, 55, having to apply for disability benefit because it's the only way they can make ends meet.
So we should have to solve the problem of humiliation, identity crisis, missing recognition, all these kind of topics. Maybe we go back to that.
And substandard investment, which is the reason for deflationary forces in the economy.
Okay. Here is the economist. Very good. Kishwer, please.
I think to some extent you confuse in your opening remarks when you said, that people don't deliver. They cynically promise things which they don't deliver. I can't think of a successful politician, and by successful, I define somebody who gets elected to office. I've tried many times. I was unsuccessful, I admit that, which is why I ended up in the Lords. But I can't think of a successful politician who has managed to win, particularly at very senior level, prime minister, president, etc., who actually said, I'm going to make your life a lot worse. Vote for me. So political hypocrisy has a long and proud tradition in representative democracy. You have to have an attractive ask to get people to vote for you, and I don't believe that it is cynical if you can't deliver that, because you obviously, within bounds, expect to be able to deliver, and then stuff happens, and stuff happens anywhere. I just tend to react against purely economic, and we had a fantastic presentation this morning from Professor Pearson and others, of all the data that demonstrates that it's not economics. It could be some economics, but it's not all economics. And I give the example of Brexit, where we found out that 1 in 4 students, in other words, well-educated people, voted for Brexit. We found out that a lot of middle-class, affluent people voted for Brexit. And we certainly know from the political class, because I speak to them regularly, that some of the brightest colleagues that I've known in politics for 30 years are actually on the Brexit side of that argument. They didn't start out being so, but they are now. And I would say that it's more a combination of factors. In the Brexit case, it's, we've already discussed this, but for people who weren't in the room, Matthew Goodwin in his presentation reminded us that the principal factor was who makes the laws in Britain. And I thought I would share this with you. Consider this. Since 1994, when I wrote that pledge to have a referendum on the euro into the Lib Dem manifesto, by 2001, by the election in the UK by 2001, every political party was offering a referendum on the EU. All main parties wanted a referendum on the Constitutional Convention, but luckily France shot that down by having a referendum and couldn't succeed. Then every political party in the UK offered a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty. Blair pushed through Lisbon without a referendum. The Liberals, my party who now want to revoke Article 50 without, my former party who want to revoke Article 50 without a thought, in fact walked out of the House of Commons during the Lisbon Treaty debate because the Speaker didn't select their referendum amendment. And then Cameron finally came to a position where he offered a referendum in 2013 after a negotiation. So his referendum was conditional. So I think what that points to is a matter of trust. And perhaps I can pick up some issues to do with trust. I don't want to dominate the discussion.
Just an intermediate question.
But I need to answer, because this is a refutation.
Okay, of course. Yeah, that's good. We have a ping pong, very lively. Did Cameron make a mistake by doing that?
No, I don't believe so. I thought I've just set out...
He called for the people to vote and see what happens.
I was a parliamentary researcher during the passage of the Maastricht Treaty in the House of Commons. It was the same time that I was writing a dissertation on the EU, so it was a remarkable opportunity to see stuff up front. It was evident to any dog or cat who walked outside Parliament that the issue of sovereignty was absolutely critical. It wasn't the pillars, it wasn't so much the aspirations towards monetary union. It was sovereignty. The United Kingdom kind of people felt we probably wouldn't go into monetary union because we had a very strong financial services sector in any event, and we felt we might lose that. But the sovereignty issue was palpable, and it has remained so. The issue of sovereignty, who makes our laws, is actually fairly profound in the British psyche. You can call it British exceptionalism.
No, we Swiss do have the same perceptions. Yeah.
Well, maybe I can inform you on this, because I was having lunch with David Cameron last week, and I asked him the same question, so maybe I can share it.
And he said, I made a horrible mistake, I'm so sorry.
No. It was an interesting conversation, and I think that we both agreed that the mistake was not to hold the referendum. The mistake was to go on that pathetic tour of European capitals, seeking another opt-out for Britain, not getting it, pretending that he got it, and then to bombard the British public with silly statistics or predictions about the Armageddon that would come if they voted for Brexit, and then to have Wolfgang Schäuble warn the Brits that if you dare get out, all sorts of horrible things will happen to you. This was like telling them vote for Brexit. But allow me to go to the serious issue. Well, firstly, I have to say that if you say quite naturally, and it is correct, that all politicians lie, or most politicians lie.
She didn't
No,
say
because
that.
No, but all
lying would be
politicians
cynical.
exaggerate.
Lying would be
Okay.
cynical. I actually preface my
All
remarks by
exaggerate.
saying they attempt to deliver what they said they would deliver.
Well,
Maybe not you, but others have.
I'm actually the only one who did
Well,
attempt to deliver and then resigned when he couldn't. I don't know anybody
Yeah.
else. Do you?
There are others who've resigned when they.
Well, I resigned
Yeah.
immediately. I did not
Yeah.
make any compromise on what I had promised I was deliver, which is a debtor structure,
That
which we still need.
That was your tragic, absolutely.
It was tragic that we
Yeah.
didn't get it.
Oh, well,
Yeah, because we're still in debtor's prison. Okay, but look, compare and contrast somebody like Thatcher and Trump, and I pick those two because they're on the right. They're not on my side of politics, not on your side of politics. Now, Thatcher had this narrative that her particular program was going to make everybody better off and so on and so forth. Yeah, this was patently untrue, but this is part and parcel of politics. I wouldn't call it lying, I would call it exuberant optimism on her part. But at the same time, she was honest to the public and she was saying, I'm going to cut your benefit. If you are on unemployment benefit, I am going to smash the trades unions if I can. She was not promising all things to all people. Whereas Donald Trump was promising all things to all people. He was promising a New Deal, he was promising an infrastructure program of investment, which never happened. He never intended to do it. He was promising to drain the swamp, and he did exactly the opposite. So this is why I think that the populist term is an important one. We should not sacrifice by saying, well, in the end, all politicians are populist. Because then we deprive the word useful meaning. That's the first point. The second point, on Brexit and the referendum and sovereignty. Allow me to agree with you on the importance of sovereignty. I think that sovereignty is crucial. Every time, by the way, for the purposes of full disclosure, I campaigned in Britain against Brexit,
Yes.
which surprised many people, especially in Brussels.
So did I. For once, we were on the same side.
oh, wonderful. Okay.
Well, you see, my argument is that even if you're a very fierce critic of your government because you think your government is doing the wrong thing, you don't want to dissolve your state. Similarly, as a Europeanist, I felt a duty to be hugely critical of Brussels. That doesn't mean I want to dissolve the European Union. I want to fix it. I want to improve it.
You're still
not to
highly
destroy
critical.
it.
You're still highly critical in Brussels.
Of course, I'm highly. Look at them, a pathetic lot, especially the new.
Okay,
team. But anyway, that's another matter.
That's quite a statement.
On the question of sovereignty, one of the greatest gifts to the Leave campaign was the argument that sovereignty doesn't matter anymore, that now we live in a globalized world and states cannot do anything. This is an appalling argument. Sovereignty matters, and it matters hugely. You can have a very useful conversation about where sovereignty lies and whether you should transfer it from your nation state, from your parliament, from the House of Commons, to the European Parliament. The problem with the European Union was that it was never transferred to the European Parliament. The European Parliament always remained a non-parliament in a sense, that it cannot even initiate legislation. And so you could have that kind of discussion. But, and this is a crucial refutation, if you want, of your argument, or attempt at refuting your argument. I'm not so presumptuous as to think that I will succeed. But the point I was making, you mentioned, 1 in 4 students supported Brexit. Well, how come you recognize the importance of sovereignty and you denounce those students? It's not that they are not sufficiently schooled in political philosophy. Maybe they think that sovereignty is more important than maintaining, the supply chain and keeping Nissan in Newcastle. Maybe they think that, and this is a very legitimate thing to think. But I have no doubt in my mind that Brexit won for good economic reasons. And when I say, I'm not saying that everybody who voted for Brexit voted for the economic reasons. Maybe many voted for the sovereignty issue. But remember, you mentioned this before, Brexit won by 1.8%. That 1.8% would have gone the other way if we didn't have, since 2010. Remember what happened?
Yeah, there might be an additional course.
3.8, not 1.48 to 52. 48 point something to 52.
Yeah, okay.
51.8.
But, oh, sorry, I thought you said 1.8.
No, I said 1.
Okay, we don't go after the
Anyway,
commas.
51.8 was the score of the Leave.
It was narrow. There's another explanation,
but the point,
of course.
the point I want to make is this. If you really wanted to get to the bottom of why it went that way and not the other way, you have to take into consideration the fact that when the euro crisis hit in 2010, the Bank of England was already printing mountain ranges of money. It was refloating the labour market and, of course, the financial market before the labour market, whereas Jean-Claude Trichet was practicing contractionary contraction. And you had 2 million continental Europeans moving to London. They did not move to London because of the good food or the good weather. The Portuguese, the Greeks, the Italians, they moved because of contractionary contraction in the Eurozone, okay, and a kind of expansionary contraction in Britain. And also, let me just share for 1 second one of my experiences when I remember in Doncaster, which, as you know, is a bellwether, because 75% voted for Leave. I remember giving a speech to a larger crowd than this of Labour supporters, because this is my side of politics, and I was trying to encourage them to vote Remain. And even though I was very popular amongst them, they turned their back against me. And they all came to me and said, after the way the Troika and Brussels treated your people, and after the referendum, there is no way as Democrats that we can support that, even if this means a major economic cost for us. So I'm not saying that it is just a deterministic economic process.
No.
But we have to take into consideration seriously the deflationary policies, which, as I said before, are always somewhere in the background of populism.
That's quite a many factors, absolutely. And I wonder also if Mrs. Merkel wouldn't have said during 2015, wir schaffen das, she coined the famous word, the Britons would have been a little bit less anxious what could happen on their borders, and it would have turned out differently. But it is as it is now. By the way, the food is, in the meantime, much better than the weather normally. This is also a rewarding point to go and live in England. Sorry, we have to defend your country. It's wonderful. We love it. Anyway, now what I wanted to say is let's put it on a little bit higher level, or a different level, or a more abstract level. I don't know. I think globalization also creates inequalities, There are the elites who live a comfort life, either liberal or conservative. There's a lot of people who don't have jobs, or elderly people who don't find jobs anymore, the young who are undereducated or try to get an education, etc., etc. And this also contributes, I think, to the rise of populism. And as I said, in different countries, different forms of populism. The question is, can we bring these factors together, like on globalization, market economy on the one side, which is definitely in many respects a good thing, but also sort of feeling safe, that you have a career, that you have a future, that you can study, or you find the safety of a working place, etc., etc. And that's a real problem, Baroness.
Yes, I'm afraid I will go back to your country in my response to that.
Okay.
By the way, I agree with your...
Let's fly tomorrow together.
I agree with your comment about Greece. The situation in Greece did impact on the consciousness of British people completely. I think it was a view of the European Union where it didn't look great in its dealings with Greece, and that resonated in the UK. I mean, Plato, somebody mentioned Plato. You did.
Again, me, yes, Plato. Sorry.
So Plato's greatest concern about democracy was that the young, the ignorant, and the poor would rule. And this was problematic because the young would always be more in number than the old, because the old died. The ignorant, Plato was always a believer in high, lofty thoughts and not those who don't know what they were doing. And the poor would always be more numerous, right? So because these groups would be numerous, they would be the decision makers, and that was his concern. So we waited 2,000 years, and then we invented this thing called representative democracy. with elections. And we elect those people, and those people go and make the tough decisions. I think there are a couple of factors that have changed that, and you can really see why the United Kingdom Parliament is so dysfunctional now in that. In the United Kingdom now, and in most advanced countries, people are becoming very educated. In the UK, I came across an astonishing statistic that 50% of people under 30 now have university degrees. So 50% of people under 30 look at the people in Parliament, recognizing that 99-point-something% of them have university degrees. And the deference of the past, which is necessary for representative democracy, you put your trust in that person to deliver for you, that deference and trust has gone. Because if I'm as well educated as you are, if I believe you're as cynical as Mr. Varoufakis thinks you are, why the hell would I give you my trust rather than taking to the streets? And actually, the other side of that is your Greta point. I agree with you that I do not see Greta Thunberg as a populist in the sense that most people would define populism. But if you're educated and if you're capable of understanding the damage that is being done by climate change, it doesn't matter whether you're old or young or whatever. You don't trust politicians to deliver for you, because the tools that they have at their disposal in a hyper-globalized, global regulated world in terms of many aspects of financial services and stuff, or trade, WTO, in a highly regulated world where the nation state has become so incapable of doing very much. I think it still can, but is it surprising that you take to the streets to deliver? To get the attention that you need to deliver.
Well, France is a very good example, isn't it?
The Gilets jaunes, and particularly when the politicians then resile from what they said couldn't be done, and they give in to do exactly that. In the UK, our target, we have a legislative target to reach net zero by 2050. Suddenly, both sides, both political parties are saying, one is saying we can reach it by 2030, which your side is saying that, which, by the way, is undeliverable.
No, it's not.
The other side is saying 2040. So you get that cynicism which creeps in.
You need a little bit more ambition.
Just a little bit.
You never lacked it, no?
Yes, indeed. Perhaps a little bit more realism might be the appropriate answer.
A combination of realism and ambition.
And here is the realist narrative. The realist narrative is that if you want to live in ever-increasing quality of lives, in terms of your economic circumstances, and you want a capitalist economy to deliver for you the way it has as yet, you cannot change that in the next 11 years. You cannot change it. So your side, I would argue, in that respect, is being disingenuous. I applaud moving the target to 2040, but I don't believe we can deliver it by 2030, and I would rather we didn't tell people that they can.
Okay, that's also a good point. And the question which follows is...
But we didn't answer your question about globalization. Can I have a try at that?
That's a good one, yes, please.
He likes his question. And I like it too. So I will try to honor it. Look, again, we have a problem of definition. What is globalization? What has globalization been? It has been the complete collapse of all impediments to capital flows and most impediments to physical trade, while taller borders and walls were being built around people. You know, the US-Mexican border was built many, many, many years before Trump came to the scene. Anybody who's traveled it, I've traveled the whole lot of it. It's an eyesore, yeah? And watching the trucks going in, imagining the financial flows going through the ether across the border, and watching those people struggling to scale at the cost of their lives often, that awful wall there. And walls all over the place, in Morocco, in Greece now, between Greece and Turkey, they're springing up. So we have a globalizing economy and a globalizing wall. They've been, each other's opposite side. That model, which was, in a sense, the exact opposite of the Bretton Woods era, the 20 years that was the golden age of capitalism.
Which worked very well, actually.
Which worked very well, but was exactly the opposite. It was, a period during which bankers had a very boring job. You couldn't do anything of what you do now, right? You had capital controls. That was the rule of the land, of the planet at the time. The model of globalized finance, effectively, created tsunamis of capital rushing in and then rushing out, leaving bubbles that burst, and huge austerity upon the people there. That created inequality within the countries, between the countries, and primarily, it created $18 trillion worth of negative yielding debt. These two are the product of exactly the same failed dynamic. And it goes back to what I was saying before, that when you've got negative yields, you have deflationary forces that are the best friend of the Bolsonaros, of the Modis, of the various people who are quite happy to weaponize racism and turn one person against another, one community against another. So this is what we need to rethink. We need a new Bretton Woods. I don't mean a repetition of Bretton Woods. What I mean is the three main centers of global capitalism, which is the United States, Europe, and China, have to redesign the financial system of the world. Well, because the financial system is not fit for purpose at the moment, and it feeds into, without being deterministically contributing to it, it feeds into the political events that this session was meant to discuss.
They should have the will and the competence and also the skills and whatever to do that together, but we see that the world is drifting apart more and more. It's exactly the opposite.
It's not looking good.
No, it's exactly the opposite.
But it's important to define what we need to do. It's important for all of us to agree what needs to be done, then to notice that we're doing exactly the opposite, and hopefully to get our act together to reverse course.
We have to define the we in a new way.
Correct.
Common knowledge.
But this is where the youngsters are being pretty good. The ones who demonstrate against climate change.
It's also not a reproach. It wasn't a reproach to Greta, beloved Greta, to say she's populistic.
But it is. When you say she's a populist, Donald Trump is a populist, they're all populists.
No.
That is. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not going to let you off the hook.
What I wanted to say
was an error on your part.
Oh, absolutely not. You didn't listen carefully. I wanted to say she is populistic in her explanations how things
you can rewrite
should be done.
What you said, but we heard what you said.
It's a function.
That's okay.
It's a function, right? Okay, good.
As a mathematician, I appreciate the meaning of that.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I tried to explain it. Maybe last question, and then the discussion is open. You really have to seize the opportunity. It's fantastic here, the two friends fighting and
we're not fighting.
Liking each other at the same time.
We are recreating the agora.
Exactly, that's the agora. Besides, not to forget, Plato didn't even realize that women existed. That was a different time.
He did realize, but he was against their being human beings.
He ignored them.
He was an appalling philosopher.
He ignored them.
I can say this as a Greek.
He ignored.
I can't stand Plato.
It was no.
You read the Republic and you freak out.
There's another discussion. Would be very interesting to.
Well, I mean,
we recognise that prophets are never loved in their own home.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I know that, but Plato would have banned
you?
And would have banned every poet and every artist and every musician.
Whom are you telling in Switzerland? No. That's true. Maybe last question. Now it's all about Hegel, famous philosopher.
Yes.
In his philosophy of right, developed the concept of recognition, and then, of course, the master and the slave, and the slave works himself up, and all this kind of stuff. quite intelligent. Doesn't work, unfortunately, right now, but it was somehow the ground or the base for the theory of the end of history, which was conceived first by Alexandre Kojève and then by Fukuyama. That's another story. What I want to say is, how can we strengthen processes of recognition among citizens, among ordinary people, that you really feel at home with yourself, what you do in work, at home, with your family, in a globalized world. And that's really the problem, because if you have the feelings and the benefits of recognition, then you also behave differently, and you are not just the angry populist who runs amok and goes crazy. How can we do that?
Some people in the audience might have heard of a British writer called David Goodheart, who divided, again in the context of the Brexit vote, but very particular to do with populism, described people as anywheres and somewheres. So the anywheres are the kind of liberal elite, able to move seamlessly from one country to another, speak several languages, very well educated and so on. Unrooted, whereas the somewheres, in his definition, were the people who, which is actually the majority of people in Europe, as well as the UK, as well as the US, live very close to where they were born. It's us who think that, internationalism is the byword, but that's not the case. Anyway, the title of his new book is interestingly called Head, Hand and Heart. Head, naturally, for intellectual prowess, education, knowledge, and so on. But he argues that status and esteem now derives almost solely to the cognitively superior class.
Right.
That the definition of who you are is not any longer based on whether you are from one country or another, from one region or another, or what you do, your trade or not. In fact, you don't call it trade, of course, any longer. The fact that of your two major banks here, one of them has come from the head has come from a very far way away, and so on. So the global, you go to a business school anywhere in the West, you will find Indians, Brazilians, South Africans, everybody. So the head part, the cognitively elite, the outstanding cognitively able people are the head, but there is opposition to them, he says, growing from those who use their hands for work. And his final point is that there isn't enough in our peak redistribution societies in the West, where no politician, as I said, can go into an election saying, I'm going to increase taxes by a significant amount, and hey guys, most of you, because the only time taxes really work is when you tax large numbers of people, not when Mrs. Warren's tax on billionaires is not going to produce very much for her Medicare policies. So no politician can go in saying, I'm going to tax you to death. I'm going to tax you to deliver to the people who you think might be undeserving what we think the state should deliver. So the whole basis of compassion, his heart analogy, is eroding in society. And his argument is that we need to recalibrate these three things to give greatest emphasis to hand and heart than we do to head. And that brings me to globalization and the Danny Roderick, the paradox of what we were talking about, the trilemma. Democracy, sovereignty, and hyperglobalization. And maybe we do have to reshore and change the structure of our economy and bring more stuff home. And maybe in aggregate, we are a little bit worse off. Danny Roderick, in his new work on populism, argues that the gains from from trade are diminishing, and unless you're highly, highly specialized, the effect on the whole, the people that they damage are disproportionately damaged for the incremental increase in trade you get. So I think maybe we do, and maybe that's what we will do in the UK, depending on how this thing unfolds, that we will rethink again our lousy productivity, our poor GDP growth, our extremely, despite the number of people who have university degrees, we have very poor skills matches and things like that. Maybe we need to look inwards for a little while rather than looking outwards. That might be the solution.
Discussion is open. Who wants to put the first question? Please.
Took too long.
I didn't get a chance to answer, but that's okay.
You have the final word afterwards, please.
And I'll be brief in answers.
I would like to ask a question for Yanis concerning the party he used to work for Syriza in Greece. And I'm interested in to what extent populism helped Syriza to get into government. And the second question, or the second part of the question, would be how did the populist discourse have Syriza adopted once it was in government? How did they have to change their populist nature once they had to take over responsibility in government? Thank you.
Well, again, full disclosure, I was never a member of Syriza by choice, because the only way I could work with them was by not reading their manifesto. And to establish some basic principles of what the economic policy would be. But I would never accuse them of being populist, at least when it came to the documents, to the manifesto, the party election manifesto in 2015. And the reason I'm saying that is because I made sure that I couldn't influence them because I wasn't a member of the party hugely, but I did influence them enough so that there wasn't a single euro promised to anyone that was earning more than 700 euros per month. So that's not exactly a populist agenda. It's not like, 5-star in Italy and so on and so forth. Secondly, how did they manage to legitimize the complete Ovidian metamorphosis over the night from the 5th to the 6th of July 2015? I have no idea. But I have to tell you that I learned a lesson in the capacity of politicians to do a mental and philosophical and political somersault in their head, and suddenly to promote precisely the opposite of what they were saying the previous day. I despaired, and I still despair to this day, at the sight of so many good people managing this flip-flop in such a very short space of time, 24 hours.
Next question, please. Yes, here.
Thank you. Mr. Varoufakis, you talk about deflation as the root of populism. And you do that probably as a kind of so-called professional economist. If you live in the real life, we have a situation that more resembles what we have in the 70s. We have stagflation.
We do?
Where we have
really
rising prices on assets, but we have stagnant salaries for a large part of the population.
But that's not the definition of stagflation. Stagflation is when the CPI goes up.
Inflation.
Yeah, but I mean,
stagflation.
I myself brought up in the 70s, and I know the prices were rising and the real wages was going down. And you have this similar situation now in many parts of Europe. And when people hear central bankers, politicals, Goldman Sachs people talking of the fear of deflation, they can see the prices is rising for food, for medical treatment, anything. And that means that the elite, or the so-called elite, they don't pass the Marx test. The most famous thing Marx said, do you believe what I say or what you can see with your eyes? Thank you.
Well, what I see with my eyes is a situation where, as you said, you were spot on one aspect. We had we still have massive price asset inflation, which also we did before 2008. after the dot-com bubble burst. But that's one thing. When I'm referring to either an inflationary period or a deflationary period, I'm talking about, the consumer price index. I'm talking about the capacity of the central bank to maintain some kind of equilibrium between savings and investment by having a positive nominal interest rate. And what I said, and we can discuss this, but not now because people get bored, my hypothesis, which is up for discussion, is that when you've got negative nominal interest rates and price asset inflation, then that is the best gift for the populists. As for the criticism of central bankers, I have no qualm joining the chorus of criticizing any authority. It's part and parcel of who I am. But when I hear, especially from the German political elite, all these accusations of the Central Bank of Europe, of Mario Draghi and so on, lambasting them for negative interest rates, I think to myself, when will they stop shooting the messenger? If you have a supply of money up there and demand for investment funding down there, you're going to have a falling price of money, and that's the rate of interest. And the rate of interest is going to become negative at some point. The problem with QE is that, yes, it doesn't help, but you can't stop it. It's like your child being infected by a bacterium that has grown resistant to the best antibiotics. You still have to administer that antibiotic because it's better than not administering it. But of course, it's not a solution.
Okay, next question, please. Oh, there's a lot of questions. Short questions will hopefully produce short answers.
My question is that we have spoken about populism in a way that it kind of gives voice to the marginalized, etc. I think that is purpose of any democracy or politics. But when we say populism, it means kind of Islamophobia or saying Hispanics are rapists. That is the kind of populism which wins people votes.
Right.
How do you kind of justify that in the context of populism being okay and a given?
Maybe Baroness would like to answer this.
I would define that more as xenophobia than mainstream populism of right or left. The solution to that, quite simply, is to have very tough laws on hate speech. Simple. Was that a short answer?
It's not.
Yeah, and absolutely.
You can't ban misanthropy.
No,
You've got
but
to
you
work
can have
against it.
laws. You can have laws
Won't
that
make
help.
any difference.
We use it. We use.
And what would you will imprison the racists? That will simply
We've managed
make
to
them
imprison
heroes.
a man called Tommy Robinson in the UK. Yes.
I know the bastard.
so-
Sorry, the question would be that people in populism
want him in
are
prison.
winning elections.
Because that will give him more power.
So
He doesn't have more power. He's much diminished since he went to prison, I can tell you.
Okay.
now the question would be that people winning as populist vote is generally happening by creating Islamophobia or any minority group. This we see across, and even in London elections, because there was a Muslim mayor of London, it was as if the terrorism was coming to London, although that was a positive result in the end. But you do see that a lot of elections are being won. Trump being a fair example, Trump resonated with his supporters not because he was promising them only good jobs. He was also telling them it's okay to be racist. It's okay to
That's
show
what
other people
Mussolini
they
did. That's what Hitler did.
Yes.
Always they go together.
That is the
But
question,
that's
that
your
why
question.
don't we take those elements of populism and
We
come
have
for
to talk
solutions
about
for that?
Sadiq Khan.
It's a never-ending learning process so as to get more civilized. Next question, please.
Yeah.
Here, maybe, or now it gets a little bit random.
Victim, victim, victim.
Hi, thanks for the talk. We talked a lot about being educated, and I wonder what we really mean by that. And we mentioned that people in the UK and all around the world are getting more and more education. More people are having university degrees. And do we really think a university degree really means being educated? Because in my...
I can assure you it doesn't.
Yeah, so in my case...
That was your own confession.
Yeah.
And so my observation,
There is also not only asset price inflation,
No.
but an inflation in the number of degrees.
Right.
Yeah, so if
And
that's the
grades.
case, do you see we need to do something for our education system? And what are they?
Of course. And what
Yes.
should we do?
Absolutely. Well, you start from very young. You do preschool, you do decent preschool, and I would say that you need to spend more money. We spend in the UK an inordinate amount of money on subsidizing universities, and we don't spend anywhere near enough on secondary schools and primary schools, and just generally in producing a more even capability at school age, whereby when people go to university, they have to come earlier in the summer to take remedial classes in math and economics to do the most simple degree. Clearly, there's something wrong that students end up with as much debt as they do at the end of the process without having earned the credentials. But having said all of that, and I work very closely, I'm involved with several universities in the UK, the desire of kids who are the first in their family to go to university, their desire to go and get a degree from a university, irrespective of the debt issue, astonishes me. But, you know, they keep on coming. They're going to not very good universities to do not very good degrees, and they're stacking on this debt. But somehow the allure of a university degree is a powerful magnet in terms of improving yourself, and it's a particularly powerful magnet for those who have nobody else in their family who've gone to university.
It's fantastic that they want to do it and they want to go into university. But to answer your question as succinctly as I can, what we need is to end this monstrosity of specialization, having an 18-year-old going to do accounting, an 18-year-old doing advertising, an 18-year-old doing what? Sumerian pottery. You know, 18 to 21-year-olds should go and have a fantastic experience at university, reading 100 excellent books from Darwin's classic to, you know,
Odysseus Elitis.
Dostoevsky, yeah?
Odysseus Elitis.
Elitis, it's fine. It doesn't matter. I would also give them a huge amount of choice. You know, have a curriculum of 1,000 books to choose 100. Mathematics and languages. That for me is the profound difference between training and education. Because as we keep saying in universities, you can train a seal, but you cannot educate it.
That's a very healthy advice. Work, work, work. Broad education. Do less Twitter. Next question.
Twitter is good because it teaches you to be succinct.
If you don't get addicted.
Hello. You talked about the origins and the solutions about populism. And I've understood that Mr. Varoufakis is pointing at very economic origins of populism, and also he's pointing at an economic solution, if I understood correctly.
I'm bringing out that dimension, which most people don't bring out.
Yeah.
Because I think that we live in a postmodern 1930s. A postmodern version of the 1930s. Thank God it's not the original version of the 1930s. But it's a postmodern version that has many similarities with the 1930s. And that is something we cannot eschew.
Yeah. And my question is directed at Mrs. Falkner, because you also went into the origins of populism. But I would be very interested to hear what is your opinion on the solutions for populism. Because from my perspective, populism is like it's a symptom of an illness. It's not that people are evil and think I'm gonna hate. It's like it's a symptom. So I was wondering what your solutions would be.
So I distinguish neo-fascist and xenophobic parties from parties on the extreme right and left. I think ideological parties that are on the extreme right or left...
What about the Alternative für Deutschland? What are they?
Do you know what? It's a very interesting thing. I'll tell you a quick little anecdote. I had to host the German foreign minister, who came with a cross-party section of MPs from Germany, where there was the leader of the Alternative für Deutschland.
When?
The UK, this was 2 years ago when Heiko Maas was just come in, when he had just come in.
They are far worse now.
British politicians, I had to host the lunch. British politicians looked shocked when I read them the list a few minutes before they arrived and said, nobody's going to sit there. And my view of life was, if you respect the German electoral system, if you respect the German democratic system, and if you're not prepared to sit there, I will sit there.
No, I understand that. That's
okay.
what the liberal
Okay.
does.
So-
but
so-
do you distinguish between extreme right AfD
And right.
and neo-fascists?
Yes, I do.
They are
I mean,
neo-fascists.
look,
A lot
you
of
have
them,
one...
not all of them.
Okay, I have
You're
to interrupt.
talking
Sorry,
about
we get
Björn
too far.
Höcke.
We have.
I'm not talking
Do
about
you
him, I'm
want to
talking about the
discuss
bulk
for
of-
2 other
particularly
hours
the
here?
voters. They're not.
I doubt
We
it.
will continue there with a drink.
We
the
will
two of us.
continue, and everybody has a lunch. We all have luncheons, and we discuss the problems to the benefit of ourselves. I had recently lunch with myself. I had great insights. What I want.
Could I just give him
No.
one answer of what we have to do?
Very short,
Because
very
his
short,
question
because
was,
we are late in
what
time.
do we have to do? We have to stop panicking about ideology and allow voters to come to the sensible discussions, but put in laws that stop discrimination, hate speech, and everything else. But I think they're going to be with us. We've got to get used to it. Democracy is fragmenting. Political parties are fragmenting. There are genuine grievances, and we've got to listen, and that's how we deal with it.
Absolutely. Don't panic. We are British. So this is also fitting to Switzerland.
Keep calm and carry on.
Oh, exactly, and drink champagne. So what I wanted to say,
Warm beer.
or a beer, okay, to clean a misunderstanding, to Yanis, I'm not sure if this is a liberal elite here. It's definitely an elite if I look down at you, or up at you actually, and because liberal in the American sense of the word is for many liberals, even in Switzerland, almost being a communist, and this we are definitely not. So, but Professor Fair is waiting to give the adieu of this wonderful day, and I thank the two of you for an absolutely lively discussion, and I think it turns in our heads, and that's important. So do your homework and come back next November. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you. It's fun.
Yeah, you have to take this.